afternoon. I'm Chief Pamela Smith of the Metropolitan Police Department. We are on the scene of a fatal officer-involved shooting in the 1300 block of North Capitol Street. I want to start off by saying any loss of life is tragic, and I want to give and extend my condolences to the family of the individual who lost his life on today. Right now, we are in the preliminary stages of the investigation, but here is what I can share with you right now. At approximately 6:43 a.m. this morning, officers and DC Fire and EMS responded to the 2500 block of Benning Road Northeast for a 911 call of a man in crisis. Officers responded to the scene. One of the initial responding officers is a trained officer, crisis intervention officer, and has a background as an auxiliary negotiator with our emergency response team. Our officers encountered the individual, and for nearly 2 hours, they engaged in crisis intervention conversation with him. Through that conversation, the individual was transported by EMS to a local hospital for additional treatment. During the EMS transport, the individual became agitated and assaulted a firefighter paramedic inside the ambulance as they came through the tunnel at the North Capitol Street. The individual then jumped out of the ambulance, and additional officers were requested to respond to the scene. As additional officers responded, the individual assaulted another responding officer. An OC spray was deployed to attempt to stop the assault and to take the individual into custody. The OC spray did not take effect, and the individual ran through traffic onto North Capitol Street and was located underneath a truck. The individual then emerged from underneath the truck with a metallic object raised in his hand. The officer gave the individual multiple loud directions to drop the object. As officers continued to give directions to the subject to drop the object, while retreating, the individual continued to move towards them with the object. At that time, one of our officers discharged his firearm. The ambulance crew immediately drove down to the bottom of the tunnel to provide life-saving efforts and measures to the individual, but unfortunately the man has been pronounced. Agents from our internal affairs divisions are on the scene currently right now conducting the investigation. The entire case will be independently investigated by our U.S. Attorney's Office. The officer has been placed on administrative duty per departmental policy, and there were no significant injuries to other responding personnel. I'll take any questions you may have at this time.
Chief, how many shots did the officer fire?
That's still under investigation.
Chief, this person who was having this health crisis, where did the officers that were trying to help, was this inside a residence? Was this out on the street?
This is outside. This was an initial call for the officers to respond to the address that I indicated on Benning Road. When they arrived there, they made contact with the individual, and during that level of communication, it was quite a significant time that they were really trying to engage this individual in conversation, because we were told that he was suffering from a mental health crisis. Again, as I stated before, one of the officers who was engaging in conversation with him was a crisis intervention officer, and he was engaged with him, and the subject took off. The subject at that time decided that he was going to be transported to a local hospital.
And this all happened outside on the street, or was it inside?
It was outside.
It was outside.
Yes, sir, and it's still under investigation.
Was that firearm recovered?
I'm sorry?
Was any firearm recovered?
That's still under investigation. There was a metal object in his hand. I did not, at this point, we're going to, as we continue to go through the investigation, we'll determine what that object was.
Was the crisis intervention officer in the ambulance at the time? And can you walk us through what the typical procedure might be if one of these officers with crisis specialty arrives at the scene and then transported? Is it common? Is it policy for that officer to remain in the ambulance?
Well, oftentimes whenever an individual voluntarily decides that he or she wants to be transported, officers do not ride in the back of the ambulance with the individual and the paramedics, but we will follow behind the ambulance to ensure that they make it to them.
Did that happen here?
What happened here was the officers was not inside the ambulance, but they did follow the truck, which is why it was an easier response time when the individual decided he was going to take flight from the back of the vehicle.
So the officer who followed, the crisis intervention officer, was that the officer who fired his or her weapon, or was that a responding officer?
That the officer is the crisis intervention officer, was the one who responded to the discharge his firearm.
Could you just walk?
Isn't it true though that when you follow an ambulance, custody, why would
That's
the
not
officer-
necessarily
Why
true.
would the officer be followed?
Well, that is part of our policies and procedures. We do follow the ambulance to the hospital. That is a part of our policy and procedures.
Even though the person wasn't in custody for any reason?
That is correct. That
Could
is
you
correct.
just walk through? So the ambulance is where it is now. Did the subject at one point jump
Assaulted.
over?
The subject assaulted the paramedic and firefighter that was inside the back of the vehicle, and then lunges out of the vehicle and then runs into the street. And while running into the street, the officers obviously tried to attempt to take custody of him. The individual engages one of our officers. An officer utilizes his pepper spray, and it did not take effect. And the attempt was really to take the person into custody. It just didn't take effect. And he got up and started running again, ended up underneath a truck. We gave very, very strong commands for the person to come out from underneath the truck. When he came out with a metal object raised in his hand. And we asked him very loudly and very clearly to put the object down. But at that point, he decided to attempt to engage our officers.
Sorry, you've been on the scene for a while, so I imagine you've recovered said metal object. So can you say whether or
That's
not
still under investigation.
that was a firearm?
It's under investigation.
Guys, we'll take two more.
Was this individual known to law enforcement or this particular crisis officer at all before this incident?
We had not that particular crisis officer had not had any engagement with him, but that's still under investigation as to whether or not we've had some engagement with him in the prior encounters.
And then about the crisis officer's background within the department, how long has this person been working in this particular role as a crisis officer?
Well, all of our officers are trained in either crisis intervention, as a crisis intervention officer, or as a mental health first aid officer. Most of our officers have received that particular training. If they go through the crisis intervention officer training, it's a 40-hour training, and then if they go through the mental health first aid training, that's a 24-hour course that our officers attend. And so the majority of officers have that training in their background.
But for this particular officer, the distinction to earn the title of crisis officer, what other kinds of additional training is needed?
I can't hear you now.
Is there any kind of additional training that officers receive in order to become a crisis response officer?
A crisis intervention officer, the same amount of training that I provided you before, 40 hours of training.
Did Chief Donnelly tell us how his EMT is doing?
Absolutely.
So our firefighter, paramedic, and firefighter EMT that are on the unit are working with our peer support team right now. The injury to the member that was assaulted is not major, but this is a tragic situation, and our condolences to go to the family. And we're taking care of our people. We have some processes that they'll follow, but they did a good job today, and it's just hard.
Chief, can you typically tell us during a transport how many EMS paramedics are inside? Where are they located?
A typical crew for a transport is 2 people, one driving and one in the back.
And the door is always open in the back? Unlocked?
So there's a space between the two, and typically that's open. They were able to communicate that there was a problem and they need to pull over. They pulled over. And
Did your firefighter EMT radio for help, or did that come from the driver?
so I think we'll have to figure all of that out in the investigation. Right now, I don't have that information.
Was she injured?
Yeah, a little bit.
Do you have anything more on the assault? We're hearing she was maybe pinned down.
I don't have all. I think all of those details need to come through the
So has
investigation.
she received hospitalization?
No, nobody went to the hospital. They're minor injuries.
In a situation like this, is a person who has experienced the crisis that you all are transported, are they patted down or searched for any weapons prior to being loaded into the ambulance?
So I think each situation is different. We don't typically do a search of anybody, and I think each situation is different. And what happened here will come out as part of the review of the incident.
Did police today?
I have no idea.
Thank you guys. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
That is a part of the investigation. So,
You can't say definitively whether or not this person was searched right now.
but what I can say is part of the investigation, and as a part of our policy, we do search individuals before they get into police cars and before they get into fire and EMS vehicles. But it's under investigation.
Right on. Thank you.